Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something that, well, it might just flip your assumptions about education right on their head. It's called the educated mind paradox.
Right.
We all tend to think more school equals sharper thinking, better decisions, that sort of thing.
That's the common wisdom, absolutely. More time learning, more rational you become.
What if that's not always how it plays out? Why is it that sometimes highly educated individuals seem just as likely, maybe even more likely sometimes, to fall for misinformation or make really questionable choices, despite all that learning?
It's a fascinating puzzle, isn't it? A real curveball.
Yeah.
Because intuitively, you'd think all those years honing your intellect would make you, well, a bastion of reason.
Exactly. You'd expect someone with, say, a PhD to be super skilled at spotting nonsense.
You would.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, you see someone highly credentialed sharing, I don't know, an obviously fake article online, or maybe sticking to beliefs that just fly in the face of clear facts.
It makes you wonder, what is going on there? So our mission, really, in this deep dive, is to try and understand why this paradox exists.
Yeah, let's unpack it.
We'll look at how education and critical thinking skills actually connect. Or sometimes don't.
And how our own thinking abilities, the very tools we use, can sometimes help, but sometimes actually hinder us.
Right. And we'll definitely get into those sneaky mental shortcuts, cognitive biases that trip everyone up.
Everyone. Doesn't matter how many degrees you have.
And finally, we'll touch on this difference between just being, smart, intelligent, and having what you might call practical wisdom.
And it's really important to say up front, we're not trying to bash education here. Not at all.
No, definitely not.
It's more about understanding its limits, perhaps, when it comes to guaranteeing rational thought in, well, every single situation. It's just a fascinating part of how our minds work.
Okay, so let's kick off with that big idea. Formal education is supposed to create critical thinkers. I mean, that's been the goal for centuries, right?
Absolutely. You go back to Socrates, always questioning, pushing for reasoned arguments. It's foundational.
And modern education systems, it's right there in their mission statements, isn't it? Developing critical thinking, being able to interpret stuff, analyze it, evaluate it, draw conclusions, explain your reasoning.
All that good stuff. And look, there is evidence supporting this. Studies do often show that people who go to college, especially those who do postgraduate work, they tend to show bigger gains in these skills.
Okay.
And gifted students, they often excel in school, and they usually score pretty high on critical thinking tests. So the potential's clearly there. Education can boost these skills.
Right. That's the promise. Education drives rationality.
Yeah.
But then comes the reality check.
Here's where it gets tricky.
Some really big studies recently, including meta-analyses, where they combine results from lots of different studies, places like the Max Planck Institute and work published in PNAS.
Yeah, top-tier research.
They paint a much more, complicated picture, especially when you look at how people handle the flood of information online, like in the real world.
And what's really striking, I think, is that these big analyses, looking at thousands of people and their ability to tell true news headlines from fake ones online, they found basically no significant link between how much formal education someone had and how accurate they were.
Wow. No strong link. That really makes you pause.
It really does. It challenges that simple equation. More school, better online judgment.
And didn't one study find something even weirder, like a true news bias?
Yes. That's right. They found that more educated people were actually a bit better at spotting real news as true. Okay, it fits the expectation, but they were simultaneously worse at identifying fake news as false. It was almost like they were perhaps more inclined to accept things presented as news.
It's complex. So they're better with the true stuff, but worse with the fake stuff. That's counterintuitive.
It absolutely is. It really forces us to ask, okay, why this disconnect? Why doesn't all that schooling directly translate into being a better BS detector online, for instance?
Okay, so what are some potential explanations? I know one idea floating around is credentialism.
Ah, yes. Randall Collins' work, a sociological perspective.
Right. What's the gist of that?
Well, the core idea is maybe degrees aren't primarily about showing you've mastered skills or knowledge. Maybe they function more like status symbols.
Okay.
Like a way for certain groups to control access to good jobs. So the focus isn't so much on what you can do, but just on having the credential.
And with credential inflation, more people getting degrees, maybe the degree itself tells us less about actual ability.
That's the argument. If everyone has a degree, it might become more of a baseline requirement, a sorting mechanism, rather than a guarantee of, say, superior critical thinking. Think about job ads, degree required, right? But does it always mean the person can think better in that role, Collins would suggest? Maybe not always.
Hmm. That definitely puts a different spin on the value we place on degrees alone.
It does. It suggests the societal function of education might be partly about social sorting, not purely intellectual development. And if that's true, it helps explain why the degree doesn't automatically equal real-world reasoning skill.
Okay, that's one angle. What else? There was something about progressive education methods.
Yes, Paul Kirshner's progressivism paradox. This one looks inside the classroom.
Right.
Kirshner raises questions about some student-centered approaches. Discovery learning, minimal guidance. The idea is often to be more equitable, let students construct their own knowledge.
Sounds good in theory.
But Kirshner argues these methods can actually overload the working memory, especially for students who don't already have a strong base of foundational knowledge in the subject.
So if you don't know the basics, being asked to just discover complex stuff is really hard.
Exactly. It can actually hinder their learning and critical thinking development, potentially even widening the gap between those who have background knowledge and those who don't. There's also a risk, perhaps, of emphasizing critique too early, before students have enough solid facts to critique.
You need something to analyze, right? You can't just critique a vacuum.
Precisely. Foundational knowledge is crucial. Critical thinking needs that solid framework to build on. If you're constantly struggling just to figure out the basics, you might not get to the higher order reasoning.
Makes sense. And then there's the point about skills maybe not transferring well.
Yes, domain specificity.
Well,
This is a big one. Education often focuses on developing skills within a specific subject. You might become brilliant at analyzing, say, 18th century poetry,
okay.
but does that automatically make you good at evaluating the claims in a viral video about a new diet? Or analyzing political arguments? The thinking skills learned in one context don't always just magically transfer to a totally different one.
So the toolkit you build for history might not work so well for, I don't know, assessing medical information.
It might not be easily applicable, no. So putting it all together, it looks like education gives us a really vital foundation. It builds cognitive capacity, provides knowledge, but it's not in itself sufficient to guarantee rational behavior or immunity to bad information across all the different messy situations we face in life. It's a starting point, a necessary one, but not the whole story.
Okay, so education gives us tools, but maybe not a perfect instruction manual for using them everywhere. Let's dig into the tools themselves, then, our cognitive abilities, like analytical thinking.
Right, that logical step-by-step evaluation, seeing patterns, solving problems methodically, involving cognitive reflection, stopping that first gut reaction.
That sounds like exactly what you need to be rational.
And it absolutely helps in many ways. Research definitely shows a positive link between strong analytical skills, often measured by things like the cognitive reflection test.
Where they give you those tricky questions with obvious but wrong answers.
Exactly, to see if you pause and think. People who score higher on those do tend to be better at telling true news from false news online.
Okay.
They even show a slight tendency towards what's called a false news bias, meaning they're a bit more likely to initially lean towards thinking something is false, which actually makes them more critical.
That sounds promising. So maybe the answer is just more analytical skills training for everyone. Problem solved.
If only it were that simple. Here comes the other edge of the sword. Motivated reasoning.
Right. We talked about this a little. It's that unconscious pull.
To process information in a way that confirms what you already believe, or protects your identity, your group affiliation.
Right.
Confirmation bias, seeking out agreeable stuff, ignoring the rest, is a key part of it.
We all do it, right? We like being right. We like people who agree with us. But how does being analytically smart play into that?
This is where it gets really counterintuitive. It's this expertise paradox or motivated reflection idea. Turns out, strong analytical skills don't necessarily shield you from motivated reasoning. In fact, sometimes they can amplify it.
Wait, what? Being smarter makes you more biased. How?
Okay, think about it like this. Analytical ability is like cognitive horsepower, a powerful mental engine.
Okay, got it.
But what directs that engine? Your underlying motivations. If your goal is accuracy, that horsepower helps you find the truth. But if your unconscious goal is to defend a cherished belief or protect your group identity,
Uh-oh.
that same horsepower can be used to become incredibly skilled at finding flaws in opposing arguments, cherry-picking data, and constructing really sophisticated-sounding justifications for your own side, even if they're, well, not objectively sound.
So you use your smarts not to find the truth, but to win the argument for what you already believe.
Precisely. Studies looking at polarizing issues like gun control, climate change, have found that people with higher quantitative skills, higher analytical abilities, often show more polarized views. Their interpretations line up even more strongly with their political tribe compared to people with lower analytical skills.
That's actually kind of scary. So being good with numbers might just make you better at twisting those numbers to fit your politics.
It can enable that, yes. The research also shows that higher analytical thinking strengthens the effect of ideological congruency, meaning if you're analytically sharp, you're even more likely to believe news that fits your ideology, true or not. And just being familiar with something, seeing it repeatedly, also interacts with this, making ideologically consistent stuff feel even truer.
Wow. Okay. So just making people better analytical thinkers isn't the magic bullet for bias.
It seems not, especially when emotions, identity, politics.
Mm-hmm.
When those things are involved, the motivation to defend can overpower the motivation for accuracy, and those analytical skills get deployed in service of that defense.
Okay, so education's role is complex. Thinking skills are a double-edged sword. Now let's talk about cognitive biases more broadly, these mental shortcuts.
Yes, and the key thing here is that biases aren't necessarily a sign of low intelligence. They're built-in features of how our brains cope with a complex world. Quick judgments, rules of thumb, usually helpful, but sometimes they lead us astray.
And crucially, education doesn't grant immunity.
Not at all. Experts, geniuses, everyone has them.
Okay, let's spotlight a few big ones. First up, maybe the Dunning-Kruger effect. That one always gets attention.
It does. Named after David Dunning and Justin Kruger. The basic finding is twofold. 1. People with low competence in an area often significantly overestimate their ability.
Why?
Because the skills you need to be good are often the same skills you need to recognize competence or incompetence in yourself and others. If you lack the skill, you lack the insight into your own lack of skill. It's that you don't know what you don't know problem.
Okay. And the other side?
The flip side is that highly competent people sometimes underestimate their relative ability, assuming tasks that are easy for them must be easy for everyone.
So how does Dunning-Kruger connect to our educated mind paradox?
Well, think about it. Even someone with a PhD in, say, literature is a complete novice in quantum physics, or international finance, or epidemiology.
Right. Expertise is usually narrow.
Exactly. But that high achievement in one area might lead to a general sense of intellectual confidence. And when they encounter a new area where they only have a little knowledge...
A little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Precisely. That little bit of knowledge might feel like enough to have a strong opinion, leading to overconfidence outside their actual expertise. They might dismiss actual experts in that other field, feeling they understand it well enough. Intellectual arrogance, maybe.
Yeah, I can picture that. The
Yeah.
brilliant scientist pontificating about politics or art with absolute certainty, despite.
Despite lacking deep knowledge there. So Dunning-Kruger can definitely play a role when educated people step outside their lane.
Okay. What's next? We should revisit confirmation bias and motivated reasoning, maybe in a bit more detail.
Definitely worth it, as they're so central. So confirmation bias is that active seeking out of stuff that confirms what we think, and maybe conveniently ignoring or quickly dismissing stuff that challenges us.
Like tuning into the news channel that tells you what you want to hear.
Exactly. Or only clicking on articles that support your view. And motivated reasoning is the deeper mechanism, the unconscious drive to interpret information, even ambiguous information, in a way that supports our side, our group, our identity. It's less about active seeking and more about how we process what we encounter.
The my side bias.
That's another term for it, yes.
Yeah.
And again, these become incredibly powerful in emotionally charged contexts, politics, religion, social issues. People, even very smart people, can become highly resistant to evidence that contradicts deeply held beliefs tied to their identity. They might use their intelligence to rationalize away inconvenient facts.
And this fuels so much polarization, right? People aren't even working with the same set of facts because they're filtering everything through their biases.
Absolutely. It's a major driver of why people can look at the same event or data and come to wildly different conclusions, and why misinformation that confirms existing biases spreads so easily, even among the educated.
Okay, one more bias to spotlight.
Let's do the curse of knowledge, or sometimes called epistemic egocentrism.
Sounds fancy. What is it?
It's actually quite simple once you grasp it. It's the difficulty that experts, people who know a lot about something, have in imagining what it's like not to know it.
Ah, okay. They forget what it's like to be a beginner.
Exactly. They unconsciously assume that others share their background knowledge, their assumptions, their way of thinking about the topic.
I can see how that would mess up communication, like a professor using jargon.
Yes, using jargon without explaining it, skipping over foundational steps because they seem obvious, assuming the audience gets nuances that actually require a lot of background, it makes teaching and communication really challenging.
And how does it relate to judgment or the paradox?
Well, it can lead experts to misjudge public understanding on important issues. They might think their message is clear when it's not. They might overestimate support for their position because they can't easily grasp why someone wouldn't see it their way, given the obvious facts. It can create blind spots.
So these biases, they don't work in isolation, do they?
Not at all. That's the really crucial thing. They interact. Think about it. Dunning-Kruger might lead to overconfidence in a domain you know little about.
Okay.
Confirmation bias then leads you to seek out information confirming your overconfident view. Motivated reasoning kicks in to defend that view if it becomes part of your identity.
Right.
And if you're an expert in another field, the curse of knowledge might make it hard for you to even understand why the actual experts in this new domain disagree with you. It seems so simple to me.
Wow. It's like a self-reinforcing cycle of biased thinking.
Exactly. And cognitive skill, that horsepower we talked about, can potentially fuel this cycle, making the rationalizations more sophisticated. And the curse of knowledge provides insulation from outside perspectives. It really shows why simply being smart or educated isn't enough.
It's a much more tangled web, which brings us perfectly to this idea of, well, the difference between just being smart or intelligent and having practical wisdom.
Yes, a really critical distinction for understanding this paradox. We often conflate them, but they're not the same.
So how would you define intelligence in this context?
Intelligence, as often measured and valued in education, is about things like information processing speed, memory, analytical skills, logical reasoning, problem solving, especially for well-defined, maybe academic-style problems.
Being quick, sharp, good at tests.
Kind of, yeah. Finding the right answer in a structured setting.
And practical wisdom, or phronesis, as the Greeks called it.
That's something much broader. It's about exercising sound judgment in complex, messy, real-life situations. It involves understanding context, seeing different perspectives, integrating knowledge with empathy, deliberating about what constitutes a good life or a good outcome for people involved. It's knowing the right thing to do in the right way at the right time.
So it has an ethical dimension, a contextual dimension.
Absolutely. Barry Schwartz talks about it involving both moral will, wanting to do the right thing, and moral skill, knowing how to figure out what the right thing is in a tricky situation.
Okay, so how does education fit in? Does it cultivate wisdom alongside intelligence?
That's the big question. Arguably, traditional education systems often prioritize the development of intelligence, measurable skills, knowledge acquisition credentials. Those are easier to quantify and test.
Right, but wisdom, that's harder to teach and measure.
Much harder.
Yeah.
Does the curriculum explicitly focus on making nuanced judgments under uncertainty? Balancing competing ethical values? Developing empathy as a tool for understanding situations? Maybe not consistently.
So we could end up with highly intelligent people, great test takers, lots of degrees, but who maybe lack that practical wisdom needed for navigating life effectively.
That's a real possibility, and it could be a key part of the paradox. They have the analytical engine, but maybe not the well-developed steering mechanism or compass of wisdom to guide it effectively and ethically in the real world. Poor judgment might stem not from a lack of intelligence, but from a deficit in phronesis.
And Barry Schwartz also argued that systems themselves, like rules and incentives, can sometimes get in the way of developing wisdom, right?
Yes, that's a fascinating point he makes. He argues that too many rigid rules can limit our opportunities to exercise judgment. If everything is dictated, you don't learn to think for yourself or learn from the consequences of your choices.
You don't build the wisdom muscle.
Exactly. And similarly, an over-reliance on external rewards, incentives, bonuses, grades can shift focus away from the intrinsic value of doing something well or ethically. It could potentially crowd out moral considerations and responsibility. People do things for the reward, not because it's the right thing to do.
So the very systems we operate in, including maybe some educational ones, might inadvertently hinder the development of the practical wisdom we need.
It's a potential unintended consequence, yes.
Yeah.
And this wisdom deficit could absolutely contribute to seeing educated people make choices that seem irrational or unethical in complex real-world contexts.
Okay, so we have the theory. Education's limits, cognitive quirks, maybe a wisdom gap. Let's talk about how this educated irrationality actually manifests. Where do we see it?
Well, one prominent area, unfortunately, is around science denial and the embrace of pseudoscience.
Even among educated people.
Absolutely. You find people with advanced degrees sometimes rejecting overwhelming scientific consensus on climate change, vaccines, you name it, or promoting pseudoscientific ideas.
How does that happen? Are they just missing the information?
Often, no. It's more about how they engage with it. They might cherry-pick data that confirms their bias, latch onto minority opinions presented as fake experts, misinterpret uncertainty as meaning anything goes, or fall for flawed reasoning that sounds superficially plausible.
And this isn't new, right? History has examples.
Oh, plenty. Think about the eugenics movement in the early 20th century. It had widespread support among intellectuals and scientists at the time, leading to horrific policies. Or Lysenkoism in the Soviet Union, where bogus agricultural theories, pushed for political reasons by an educated elite, caused famine. Or even the pseudoscientific justifications used under regimes like Nazi Germany. Education, sadly, didn't prevent participation in those cases.
It's sobering. It shows credentials aren't a shield against deeply flawed or dangerous ideas.
Not automatically, no. The tactics used are often quite sophisticated, creating fake controversies, exploiting normal scientific uncertainty, appealing to conspiracy or emotion, using logical fallacies dressed up as reasoned argument.
And beyond science, we see poor judgment in other areas too.
Yes, though we have to be careful with historical judgment.
Mm.
But looking back, you can see instances where educated elites used the intellectual frameworks of their time to rationalize things we now see as profoundly wrong, like slavery or systemic discrimination.
And today?
Today, you might see policy debates where deeply held moral or political convictions seem to completely override factual evidence, even among well-educated policymakers or advocates. Or you might see educated individuals expressing prejudices that seem at odds with principles of fairness, perhaps rationalized in complex ways.
It really hammers home that expertise isn't universal wisdom.
Exactly. And expertise itself has vulnerabilities.
What do you mean?
Well, deep specialization can lead to tunnel vision. Experts might become overconfident when they stray outside their specific field. Remember Dunning-Kruger?
Right.
Their professional identity might get tied up with certain theories, leading to motivated reasoning if those theories are challenged. And academic or professional systems themselves aren't immune to groupthink or bias.
So even when listening to experts, we need to be critical.
We do. Look beyond just the credentials. Consider potential biases, conflicts of interest, the broader consensus in the field. Expertise is valuable, but it doesn't equal automatic objectivity or perfect judgment.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, the educated mind paradox is clearly pretty complicated.
It really is. There's no single simple explanation. It's this interplay between, the sometimes limited impact of formal education on real-world rationality.
The double-edged nature of our own analytical skills.
The fact that cognitive biases are just part of being human, affecting everyone.
And maybe this gap, this societal tendency to prioritize measurable intelligence over harder-to-pin-down practical wisdom.
Exactly. It's a convergence of all these factors.
So given all that complexity, what can we actually do? How do we move towards cultivating not just educated minds, but perhaps wiser ones?
That's the crucial next step, isn't it? And it's likely not about one single fix, but several connected approaches. Well, fostering what's called epistemic humility seems key. That means recognizing the limits of our own knowledge, being genuinely open to the possibility that we might be wrong, even about things we feel strongly about.
Being less certain, more curious.
Precisely. Another is developing metacognitive awareness, basically, thinking about our own thinking, learning about common biases like confirmation bias or Dunning-Kruger, and consciously trying to spot them in ourselves.
So teaching people about bias helps them manage it.
The evidence suggests it can, yes. We also need to think about how to actively cultivate practical wisdom, maybe through case studies, grappling with ethical dilemmas, exercises that require perspective-taking and balancing competing values, both in education and professional development.
Making judgment skills an explicit goal.
Right. And specifically for today's world, we desperately need better critical thinking skills tailored for the digital age, media literacy, understanding algorithms, spotting misinformation tactics online,
Yeah, that's huge.
and maybe rethinking pedagogy a bit. Ensuring that solid foundational knowledge is there, but also integrating inquiry and critical analysis effectively, avoiding the pitfalls Kirshner mentioned. And finally, just generally encouraging intellectual virtues, things like curiosity, open-mindedness, intellectual honesty, courage to challenge assumptions.
It sounds like a holistic approach, really, moving beyond just cramming facts or skills.
It has to be. Because true rationality, or maybe wisdom, isn't just about what you know. It's about how you use that knowledge, how aware you are of your own limitations and biases, and how committed you are to applying your understanding thoughtfully and ethically in the real world.
So the goal shouldn't just be educated minds, but wise ones.
That puts it perfectly. That's the deeper challenge, I think.
Okay, so maybe a final thought for you listening. Take a moment to consider your own thinking. Where might your blind spots be? What biases might be subtly shaping how you see the world or evaluate information? It's not about being perfect, but maybe just starting that journey of self-awareness, cultivating a bit more humility, a bit more wisdom in how we navigate everything life throws at us.
A continuous process for all of us.
This is DigitView.